Hi, welcome to another episode of the Med Device Cyber Podcast. Today we're talking about what happens when your cybersecurity flaw doesn't just cause a breach, but it breaks the law. And there's been a recent case where the Department of Justice had an enforcement against a medical device manufacturer, Illumina, and this is public knowledge, because they sold their system under false claims. There was some false pretenses about how secure the system was, and the exact vulnerabilities weren't disclosed. They were sort of hidden. And the whole idea is that cybersecurity failures today are now being prosecuted, not just penalized, because the risk is much greater with medical devices. We're looking at patient safety. We're looking at potentially killing a patient or maiming a patient or misdiagnosing a patient. And this is a much greater risk than something such as HIPAA, which has traditionally been the enforcement with within the healthcare umbrella. So before we dive in too much, I want to introduce our co-host here is Trevor. Trevor's coming to us. He just moved to California, the Bay Area, and he was explaining that he doesn't have California license plates or driver's license, so he has to move his car quite often so he doesn't get a ticket. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, so in this neighborhood, you have to have a parking permit to park for longer than 2 hours. To get a parking permit, you need California registration. To get California registration, I need to get California insurance. To get that, I need California residency. And since I just moved here, I don't have any bills or any receipts, anything like that. So this is going to be a fun month of shuffling around my car every 2 hours. In a parking garage, the closest one to me is $500 a month. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do the car shuffle for a month.
So this is particular to your complex then, because I've traveled to California with an out-of-state license plate, and I didn't have to move my car all the time, but I'm not living in a neighborhood.
It's just a San Francisco thing. This neighborhood has parking permits and all that. Some don't. And so sometimes people just leave their car wherever across the city and then just take the bus back and forth to their car.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, because I've been to California quite a bit, and I would see these old RVs parked in random neighborhoods, and they seem like they just park there and live in those RVs. So I understand the problem they're trying to solve. So no worries. I'm still in Phoenix today. Supposed to be a hot day. I went out for a walk yesterday. It was like 118, but I cooled down, I think, to 111 when I walked. It was a little bit later, but still pretty hot out.
A nice cool temperature of 111. Perfect for a walk.
Hey, it's a dry heat. I was in New Jersey not too long ago, and it was like 95 and 99% humidity. So that felt hotter to me than here.
Yeah, Phoenix doesn't feel too bad. If you're out of the sun, it feels quite nice, actually.
Yeah.
It's mostly the sun is intense, not really the air.
The sun is definitely intense, yeah. Awesome. So let's dive into this civil cyber fraud initiative, which is DOJ's initiative to use the False Claims Act to really pursue vendors and contractors that misrepresent their cybersecurity protections, and in particular in healthcare. What is your thoughts, like why we're moving this direction, and how come we haven't been doing it, more diligently in the past?
Cybersecurity is still a pretty new industry as far as things can go, and it's so rapidly evolving. We even look at the addition of regulatory requirements around cybersecurity was only 2 years ago. So this is a fairly new industry, and it's so rapidly evolving. I think that governments around the world are trying to figure out ways to get on top of it. And unfortunately, regulation moves a little bit slower than some industries, such as cybersecurity. So it's an especially hard problem to solve. What we're trying to do now is bring some enforcement to an actual consequence, an actual punishment if cybersecurity standards are not adhered to. When going through different processes, trying to certify, for an example, if you're, getting a car sold in America, or getting a medical device sold in America, or industrial control systems and automation systems, these all have different cybersecurity requirements that are constantly getting more and more strict and evolved, especially in healthcare. And if these are violated, now there's going to be an enforced actionable punishment against the companies that knowingly violated best cybersecurity practices.
Knowingly violated is the key. Yeah. And we've been enforcing HIPAA for like a really long time. So is this a big shift in your opinion, like away from, or maybe in parallel to like this HIPAA enforcement that's been going on? Like, what is your thoughts on HIPAA versus what we're talking about here with medical devices?
Well, looking at HIPAA, we can just break apart the acronym to see how it's a little bit different. It's the Health Information Protection and Privacy Act, and that is looking at healthcare information. With a medical device, of course, that's going to be relevant. We think about how many different systems now integrate with electronic health records. It's saving clinicians tons of time. The processes are super automated and easy to follow now, but there's an added layer. There's the patient harm layer. Think about a implantable device like a drug infusion pump or a pacemaker is another great example. If one of these devices gets hacked into, it's not really going to be much of a concern around the healthcare information. It's going to be a direct safety consideration. So even though, of course, it's very bad, it's very dangerous, it can lead to a lot of downstream problems. If your healthcare records get breached, it's not a safety consideration. You aren't going to be directly physically harmed because of it. So this is why it's a little bit of it's a bit new in the space. There aren't too many industries where cybersecurity can lead to tangible physical harm or even death in some cases. So I think that's a little bit of a disconnect between this industry and other industries, which is why it's so rapidly evolving and why it's a little bit different from HIPAA. And so we're seeing some different controls and different consequences as opposed to HIPAA compliance.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, the risk is much greater, as we always talk about with a medical device versus someone stealing your PHI, which is, all mine's been stolen probably 1,000 times already. But it is not directly impacting my health right now or anything. Like a surgical robot performing surgery on me, on my knee, and it goes haywire, could damage my knee, obviously. So with the Illumina case, I think this one's pretty interesting. And I was wondering if this would have even come to light if they didn't sell into federally funded healthcare organizations. Because, anytime you sell something to the government, you're under more scrutiny and you're in their crosshairs of their regulations. I know there's a whistleblower involved, but what's kind of a little bit of the backstory on the Illumina case that you're aware of, Trevor?
So you touched up on a couple of the key main points there. There was a whistleblower involved who went to the DOJ to talk about these problems, or either to the DOJ or the FDA. I'm not sure on the exact details there, but this was sort of a joint effort with the Department of Justice and then the US FDA to try to persecute this, since the FDA is responsible for medical devices, and the FDA sets and enforces these controls for cybersecurity. Of course, it's the Department of Justice that's executing that enforcement, but the FDA sets these standards. Now, selling into a government agency is certainly going to be part of it. You have to go through the FedRAMP process to get approved into government supplier lists, things like that, which is generally a little more strict than some private controls. But I don't think this would have stayed buried even if they were only selling privately. The class of device that is typically in this diagnostic space will fall under the PMA pathway. And the PMA pathway requires annual reporting on all sorts of different factors, but relating to cybersecurity, it is based off of cybersecurity effectiveness, control, patching rates, lots of stuff like that. So I feel like the cracks would have started to show eventually one way or another. They may have come up during an audit by the FDA or even as part of that annual reporting. Now, I think that it's good that obviously it came out sooner than later. After a deeper investigation, it turns out that a lot of very critical security controls were completely omitted from the system. The Illumina knowingly and admittedly did not follow security by design principles. So they integrated a lot of different software, a lot of different products or product components into their system, while knowingly doing so in a risky manner. Especially in the diagnostic space, this can lead to misdiagnoses, mistreatments, or I guess it would be a mistreatment, maybe the administration of therapy that could be potentially harmful. You think about something like a cancer diagnosis and a cancer treatment. If you are misdiagnosed with cancer, chemotherapy is brutal and it's terrible for you. Even if you have cancer, it's really, really hard on your body. So you have to imagine, what if you don't have cancer and you're unnecessarily going through a really rough treatment?
Yeah, and some of the internal communications were made public as well, where the organization, I think the whistleblower or someone in that person's area of work flat out said that this device is not secure and there are major risk with it, but they chose to go ahead and put it to market anyway.
Yeah, there were some internal communications where they knowingly had documented that there were uncontrolled risks in the system and had that written down and secured internally that it should not be used in a healthcare delivery organization due to these uncontrolled risks, and then sold it anyways. So there was a lot that went wrong with how this was handled, and it came out to be essentially an act where they willingly were trying to defraud the FDA based off their security controls and saying that they had a secure product when they didn't. Integrating this into other systems can be a huge risk as well. I know we talked about the consequences of a misdiagnosis or something of that nature, but think about the fact that this is going to be used. Systems can be used in a wide range of environments. And in a healthcare delivery organization, think about how many hundreds, if not thousands, of different medical devices are there. What if one of them gets compromised that leads to other ones getting compromised, and further downstream consequences there can be pretty significant?
Yeah, and this is an interesting scenario, and maybe it will change the landscape a little bit, because I don't know of too many cases like this Illumina case that have come to light with medical devices and the Department of Justice and legal ramifications. Because I think this probably happens more often than we like to think of. Because if I'm a company and I'm losing money during development, the sooner I get my product to market, the quicker I can start generating revenue. So I think a lot of companies probably take some risk to get that product to market. It's just a matter of like what types of risks they're actually taking and which ones are acceptable. And it sounds like the ones that Illumina took are not acceptable due to the criticality of their device and the class of their device. But I know we've had clients in the past that, I don't know if it's the organization as a whole or like the specific software developer, that we pointed out something that was pretty major and they fixed it in this one little area to try to fool us, but didn't fix it across the system as a whole. So I have to wonder, like, why are they doing that? Is it to test how good we are, or they just want to, check a box and move on, and they don't actually care about the security? Or it might just be the software developer's personality. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in that specific scenario, it was very interesting. They applied a control to one user account specifically instead of doing it globally. And of course, that was our test account that we were using. So we were able to see, we had some other vulnerabilities. We were able to compromise other accounts. And we saw through those accounts that this was not a global control. Oftentimes it can be trying to reduce time to market or trying to speed up a process. There might be some technical constraints that are baked into the device where a remediation is just impossible. It's going to have some level of risk. And this generally means that we shifted security too far down the line. The FDA states that we should build security into our devices, which helps prevent these problems. If security is built into a product, you aren't going to have to worry about down the line going, oh, we made a critical design flaw that is inherently insecure and it's going to take us months to fix this problem. It would have been caught early on when trying to evaluate the security implications of these problems. Now, with medical devices, it's a very difficult problem since, like we said, this is a very new problem. The FDA guidance on cybersecurity came out in September of 2023, and the average time to develop a medical device is around 7 years. So it hasn't even been 2 years since this guidance has been in place, and manufacturers are submitting devices that they'd been developing for 5 years before the guidance came out. So trying to retrofit security by design for some of these currently in development devices is very difficult.
That's a very good point, because I know we have a prospect that may become a client. Their device, I think, their estimated release date is in 2031, I believe you told me. Is that right?
Yes.
That's 6 years from now. So they're developing it now, or starting to develop it over a 6-month time frame. If you don't consider cybersecurity from the beginning, in that, or a 6-year time frame, I'm sorry, there are a lot of things that you could do poorly, or things that just may evolve from a risk perspective. So yeah, it's a big challenge, actually, especially given that length of time frame.
Definitely. And, of course, cybersecurity is only one of the dozens of things that have to be considered when developing a medical device. And unfortunately, it can fall a little bit to the back burner when everyone's dealing with their clinical trials or their pivotal studies, human factors, animal tests. There are so many different things that are going to go into medical device development and really development in any regulated industry. Cybersecurity can just be an afterthought far too often, but it is the new hot topic for the regulators. As we can see, it's getting enforced, it's getting punished. It is really at the front of mind for not only regulators, but law enforcement as well. So mishandling it is going to become more and more significant of a problem.
Yeah, and I think we are finally getting to the point where cybersecurity can be considered a clinical risk. And I think we've been talking about this for a long time, but this case and a few other things that have happened relatively recently have indicated that we're moving that direction, and people are finally starting to take cybersecurity for real. Because we've had a number of incidents where poor cybersecurity has been tied to patient mortality, increased patient mortality when there's delayed treatment because a device has ransomware or imaging systems are offline, and all these things cause mortality, but people just haven't directly, for some reason, tied them to cybersecurity. And I think we're starting to see that tie start to come together.
Yeah, even recently, I don't know, we've talked about this on some previous episodes, but there was a ransomware attack against a blood center, which was performing dialysis and cancer treatments in the UK. And it was a little bit more remote. And when they got ransomed, they could deliver no treatment for weeks. Every single one of their systems was locked up. And so a lot of people who needed critical care, you think about dialysis, you're on a timer. You need to get that done pretty often. A lot of cancer treatments for very advanced things like blood cancer can act very quickly and kill very fast. And there were deaths directly tied to this ransomware attack and denial of service and denial of availability for treatment. So we are seeing, I think that we're coming to the realization as an industry, this is a really big problem and people can die. People can get really hurt, where before it was a little bit more of a hypothetical, what if this happened? We want to try to get ahead of it. But now I think we're seeing it happen to some places that are maybe still getting caught up to the latest and greatest for cybersecurity.
Yeah, 100%. And we're shifting from, just being a technical risk, obviously with this case, to there's legal risk involved as well. And we talk about this on almost every episode, I feel like these days, the SPDF, the Secure Product Development Framework, as a way to help build security into the device. Do you feel manufacturers are starting to consider that? Or are we seeing improvements or shifts in the industry in a positive way with secure product development?
Well, anecdotally, looking at what we see coming in on, the sales side of things, what we get for inbound discovery requests, I think the amount of companies that we're seeing come in say, hey, we're submitting in 12 months or 18 months, but we want to start designing more controls into the device early and then work on our testing and documentation, 4 to 6 months out. That we've seen a massive uptick in that recently, which I think is great. It does show that the industry is starting to mature a little bit. And this is partially due to manufacturers coming in that we've had as previous clients, where we talk about some of these problems. We point out a bunch of pain points through doing it at the last minute. And they go, wow, that was really rough to do last time. Let's try to fix this up for next time. So we are seeing a little bit of that as well. But in general, I do think that the industry is starting to get a little bit wiser to some of the cybersecurity problems that come up. It's still a little bit of a slow progression, and we're still dealing with retrofitting devices currently in active development to new cybersecurity standards. So it's not a perfect solution, but I think we're getting there.
Yeah, I agree with that. When you're talking about the sales cycle and discovery meetings, it seems like we've had an uptick and people that did a submission, but they have done some research and they're anticipating deficiencies. So they come to us proactively saying, we're expecting to receive deficiencies on X, Y, and Z cybersecurity controls. So can you be on standby to help us when we get these deficiencies? So they're like, it's like they already are aware, and that awareness is, came during their submission or shortly thereafter. So I think the industry as a whole is starting to gain some of that awareness based on, what we're seeing inbound from a lead perspective.
We've even had a couple of companies with honestly a bit of an interesting submission strategy, and it ends up working out fairly well, where they submit with what they have to try to stay on their timeline, but they understand how long FDA review cycles take. And so oftentimes you'll submit and then you sit around and wait for months to hear a response. And so they submit, they come to us and say, hey, we know we didn't do a good job on our cybersecurity testing and documentation. Can you take a look at it, figure out what the FDA is going to say before they say it, and then just proactively create all this gap analysis? So even past being on standby, they just submit and go, we know we're going to get kicked back. Let's start over. And then when the FDA does come back and they say, hey, here are all the deficiencies and problems, they go, it's funny you should mention that. We already have a solution. We've been going through the testing, remediating these problems, building out new documentation during your review cycle. And then once you're in the review cycle, you get a faster turnaround time from the FDA. And so they submit their cybersecurity, deal with any questions or clarifying comments around, their clinicals, their biocompatibility, any of these other problems that they might encounter. And so it actually can end up speeding up the process, weirdly.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's all about the regulatory strategy and how you think you can work the system to get things through the quickest. And I've seen a big uptick in that. Let's just get the process started with the FDA and then anticipate the deficiencies and have a packet ready to address it as soon as we receive the notice. Yeah.
Yeah. Submit good enough and then hope for the best.
For sure. Why do you think we're in this scenario? Because I know in business, there's always this challenge of aligning your sales team, your engineering team, your marketing team, your compliance team. And I guess it's a big challenge, I think, for a medtech innovator, because you're trying to sell this thing almost all the time before you actually have it developed, and you're trying to appease your investors. So from a challenge perspective, how do we make sure our devices are actually secure, and how do we align all these different functions in our organization to be on the same page? Or is that even feasible, do you think?
It's difficult. Medical devices are very tightly regulated. They're very expensive to develop. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of skill, takes so much regulatory padding and different alignment of processes. I think that's why we see such a high failure rate in medtech startups. I know you've had conversations with investors in the past that have shared as high as 93% of medtech startups fail, since oftentimes people go into this not knowing how complicated it can be. But starting with the end in mind is something that I've heard all the time from people trying to help medtech innovators, investors, like go-to-market strategists. So what is your end goal?
That's my tagline. Yours is early and often. I always say start with the end in mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Backwards.
And so then we can tie them in together. Start with the end in mind. What's your goal? Where do you want to end up? And then how are you going to get there? What do you need to do? Start it early, do it often, make sure you're covering all of your bases all the way through. Even looking at, and this is going to apply to more than just cybersecurity. So it's general for regulatory for innovators. We look at the total product lifecycle, and we think of total, that's covering development all the way to decommissioning, down to the end of life. So how are we handling every single different aspect of security, of dealing with, user notifications, of dealing with software updates, changes to your intended use cases throughout the full life cycle of the product, and making incremental adjustments as you go so that it's not anything that piles up towards the end.
Yeah, 100%. And we're coming up on time here. So I think a couple key takeaways are, I guess one is, when you lie about cybersecurity, you don't just risk a data breach, you're risking the DOJ coming after you at this point. There's some legal ramifications that have greatly increased. And something else is like HIPAA, with your medical device is that if it touches patient care, then it touches the federal government, in particular the federal government in terms of enforcement. So it's we're really seeing the uprise in scrutiny and government oversight on medical devices because, as we talked about in this episode, it's becoming tangible. It used to be in theory somebody could kill someone with a medical device. Now it's becoming tangible. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Med Device Cyber Podcast. We're going to wrap it up here. And as always, if you need any help with medical device cybersecurity, feel free to reach out to Blue Goat Cyber. Thanks, and hope to see you on the next one.